Great. Okay. My name's Evan Dreyer. I am representing Rise Denver here. I actually work in the mayor's office. Thank you for inviting us, allowing us to make a brief presentation about Rise Denver. The Rise Denver package is an infrastructure bond package that will appear on the ballot. Ballot should be arriving in mailboxes now. And it appears as 5 measures, 2A, B, C, D, and E. In all, it's 88 different infrastructure projects, and they're broken down into different. The reason they're different questions is because there's different types of projects, and I'll talk about some of the specific projects in a minute. But the general categories for these are city facilities, city buildings, including the cultural institutions as well, housing and homeless shelters, that's measure 2B, transportation and mobility, parks and rec, and the National Western Center, and that's 2E. We are spread across the entire city. There are projects in every city council district. All told, 7,500 jobs would be created over the next decade, $1 billion of economic benefit, and $480 million in wages to the workers as well. It's really important to note that this package does not increase tax rates, does not increase taxes. We are asking voters for approval for authority to bond or to borrow within our existing capacity. And that's, I think it's a really important point that we want to stress for everybody. Some of the outcomes that we're trying to achieve, in addition to the projects themselves, we have a long-standing goal of ensuring that all residents live within a 10-minute walk or bike to a quality park. Vision Zero is something that we've been working on for a few years. We're trying to get to a point where we don't have any pedestrian or bicyclist fatalities in the city by 2030. This package will help us fill in some gaps in our library system, and it also will make some important upgrades when it comes to ADA accessibility. There are a couple of historic buildings, one on the National Western campus and one on the Loretta Heights campus, that would be refurbished and used for public purposes as part of this package as well. I think we're all familiar with the homeless crisis that we have in our city right now, and a couple of these projects would help us address that as well. Just a map to show the different types of projects and how they are spread across the city. So I'm going to talk just in a little bit of detail about some of the projects within each of the measures. 2A, the city facility measure, would bring us 2 new libraries, one in Globeville and one in Westwood. There would be some maintenance and upkeep that would happen at all of the culturals, the zoo, the Museum of Nature and Science, Botanic Gardens, and the Buell Theater as well. Expanding a youth empowerment center, the ADA upgrades to city buildings, and then one of the renovations of historic buildings I mentioned is the May Bonfils Stanton building, the theater at the Loretta Heights campus as well. So that's 2A. 2B is the housing and sheltering for people experiencing homelessness. We've got a shelter, one of the shelters out on 48th Avenue is currently leased, and this measure would provide the funds so that we could purchase it. We are also utilizing hotels and motels to provide what's called non-congregate housing and sheltering. This measure would allow us to expand that program by 300 rooms. And this is something that we are really interested in doing as quickly as possible. We have about 18 or 1,900 people in our sheltering system right now. And we see the motels as a really good option for folks that where the shelters just aren't a good option. So we're excited about this measure and the good that it will bring to the city as well. 2C, Transportation and mobility, one of the biggest issues in the city right now is trying to do what we can to improve the movement of people and goods and ideas around our city, doing it as safely as possible. So this package would bring improvements to sidewalks, improvements to more protected bike lanes, like you can see here, and intersection safety as well. Again, trying to achieve the goals of our Vision Zero program. 2D, Parks and Rec, number of projects to improve park and recreation facilities around the city. One of the signature projects in this package would be transforming the Sloan's Lake Boathouse into a 6,000 square foot community space, renovating renovating the pool at Curtis Park, and then many of our courts and fields around the city have deteriorated over time and need to be upgraded and replaced and enhanced. This also would provide funds for replacing equipment in our rec centers as well. And then 2E, this is the one that seems to be attracting the most attention right now. It's got the largest dollar price tag on it as well. It's the biggest project in the entire package. It's two projects, really. This is the other transformation of a historic building. This is one of the original buildings on the National Western campus. If this measure passes, this would provide the funding to transform that historic building into a public market, which would meet the needs of neighborhoods that have been identified by the federal government as clearly being in a food desert. And then creating a public space, a market space, a place for local businesses where they could set up shop, and a gathering place for the community as well. And then the other project that's part of this measure is establishing and creating a new year-round arena that the stock show could use during the 2 weeks that the stock show is running, but it also would have the capacity to handle about 200 other different types of events throughout the year. Everything from high school sports to concerts to other kinds of shows. This facility really would be the economic driver of the campus. And the reason that is important is because we have created a new community investment fund that will provide financial support for the surrounding neighborhoods. This community investment fund would be overseen and managed by the neighborhood as well. So having this new arena, generating revenue, providing funds for the community investment fund for the community is really a plus and a benefit for this project and for the community as well. So that covers the nuts and bolts of A through E. A number of organizations and individuals are supporting the Rise Denver package. And again, you will see this on your ballot as measures 2A through E. I am happy to take questions if y'all have any time for that.
I know there were a couple of questions that came up in the chat, and it looks like Patricia Luby, you might have a question.
Oh, no, I do not. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I think I will mute you in a minute just so we don't get the background noise.
I do see a question in the chat about.
Yes, if you'd like to address the ones in the chat, that would be great.
Sure. I think this is a good question. Why we always hear that the homeless don't want to go to shelters. Why would we put more money in shelters instead of treatment centers and mental health facilities? It's a good question. People do use our shelters, and they use them a lot. We, on average right now, have about 1,800 people a night in our shelter system. What we're trying to do is improve and upgrade the system so that we can meet the demand of people right now who are out on the street and don't feel like the shelters are a good option. We want to remove the barriers to entry. We want to do what we can to try to decompress or space out people in the shelters. We want to create opportunities where the shelters have some privacy for folks, so it's not, they don't have these big warehouse feel to them. So that's part of what this measure would do. And the other part is give us that opportunity and the funding capacity to buy some hotels and motels, some underutilized facilities right now, to create even different types of shelter opportunities that feel more like housing. Because that's really the ultimate goal, is to try to get people into housing. None of us disagree that we need to put more resources into treatment, particularly residential drug treatment. Absolutely a big gap in the entire system right now. And Caring for Denver, which is a voter approved measure, is providing some support. We opened a facility, 46 bed, we call it the Solution Center. It's in the Sun Valley neighborhood, that also is providing some relief for folks right now who are experiencing a mental health crisis. And those are good steps, but they're clearly not enough. The need out on our street right now is tremendous. So I totally agree. And I think we have to walk and chew gum at the same time.
Evan, I have a question. Thanks for the presentation. I'm all for passing these bond measures and providing money for the city to help our communities, but I'm going to pick on one program, which is Vision Zero. I don't see Vision Zero doing what it's supposed to do, and it hasn't for years. No less people are dying every year on the streets from cars, pedestrians and bikers. And I don't know, I'd love to hear from you what's going to be different when we pour more money into the program.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. We implemented Vision Zero, I think in 2016. We had a good couple of years, and then the number of fatalities actually increased. I think because there were less people driving in 2020, because of the pandemic, we got back to a point where that was a good year, but the numbers are not great so far this year. What will be different? I think what we need to do is take this multi-pronged approach. We need better technology. We need higher visibility. I think Councilman Cashman is on in the meeting too. We need lower speed limits. We need a better education campaign, and providing funds for some of the physical changes, some of the technology changes will help. It'll be one tool in the Vision Zero toolbox. But I don't disagree with you at all, Adam, that we absolutely have to do a better job. If we're going to get people out of cars, if we're going to get them onto their bikes, if we're going to encourage people to walk, we're going to get them into transit, it has to be safe. And that has to be the first priority. There's really no question about that.
Evan, I have one comment related to Vision Zero and one question related to 2A through 2E, which comes from, it's me and also another person in the group. First of all, comment, one of the things I would love to see the city do, although I know that drivers would not particularly like this, but it would go a long way to lowering the apparent speed with which someone can drive through a street. And that is to get rid of our one-way streets and to really have the city look at the multitude of studies that show that two-way street systems move traffic more quickly and decrease pedestrian vehicular accidents and deaths. So that's the comment. Question is from me and also Biddy. I noticed when I read our evening reading during the election ballot season is always the blue books over dinner every night, and we carefully read every single thing. And something I never understand is why initiatives like 2A through 2E say this will not affect your taxes, and then the very follow-up section is requesting permission to increase property taxes. So if it doesn't increase taxes, why does it have the information about property taxes? And one of our members asks if 2A and 2E has an effect on real estate taxes.
Let me unpack that a little bit. On the one-way to two-way streets, I think that our Department of Transportation and Infrastructure in many cases agrees with you, and they have over the last couple of years made a number of conversions. Most of them closer into downtown, but I think that they will be looking citywide to see if there are opportunities to do more of that, to your point. On the last question about real estate taxes, no, this does not have an impact on any taxes, on any tax rates. The reason for that really confusing and complicated language, and it's a personal frustration of mine, when we are working with our attorneys, the bond attorneys, to craft the language, they take an extremely conservative approach. They want to make sure that that everything is described as transparently as possible for folks. And sometimes that means that it gets confusing to lay people like myself. We are, over the past, I think 5 to 7 years, as we have rolled off some of the debt from some of our previous bond measures, we have never increased, added a mill or increased the mill rates to cover debt from a bond package like this. In fact, we have held our rates as low as possible, and in some cases, some years, actually lowered mills, what we call not activated mills as well. So,
but the bond measures effectively ask our permission for you to do that if you need to. Is that correct?
If needed, yeah, the permission would be there. But like I said, we've not ever had to do that in modern history.
Okay.
And
Tim, would you like?
Have no intent of doing that here, and don't need to. We're within our capacity to borrow and to bond, and we wouldn't be putting this measure before voters if that were not the case. We would not be asking for a tax increase if that was the only way to do it. We wouldn't do that.
Okay. Tim, you have a couple questions in the box. Would you like to ask them, or would you like me to ask them?
Sure, I'll be glad to. One of the concerns that has been raised is that a significant number of people who are homeless are there because they either have mental health or addiction problems. I think it's admirable to get them off the street, but without doing something to provide help with their basic problems, isn't there some concern they'll damage, destroy, or not care for the housing that they're placed in? I'm bringing that up because the safe outdoor sites, which I had a tour of way back last summer with Paul Kashmann, those sites did provide both mental and physical health support, social service support, and for those who wanted it, help trying to get off the street. So is the city allowing funding for that?
Great point. We do provide some level of support services in the shelters, but those are big congregate settings, and it's difficult to do that. But over the last few years, we have started to provide additional services into the shelters. In a non-congregate setting, like a hotel, motel, where someone's living in a single room, it is easier, more conducive to providing services. And that is something that we've been able to do during the pandemic. The ultimate goal with all of this, whether it's a safe outdoor space or a shelter or a motel, is to move people into housing. And some people in housing are going to need supportive wraparound services and some won't. And so our goal is to provide the kinds of services that you're talking about alongside of, in addition to, and with the housing. Housing is crucial, and so are those support services for many people to keep them housed.
I have one more comment, if I could.
Yes, sir.
I do have some questions about 2E, but I'd like, and I'm hoping you can stay to until Christine O'Connor is done with her presentation, because that's going to be a counterpoint to 2E, to your supporting 2E. I attended the INC meeting this Saturday. some of you know I've had some Zoom problems, so I ended up sharing the screen with the host, so I had to leave the meeting. But that forced me to watch the video of the meeting. Since I'm retired, I have time to do that. And I was able to study the point counterpoint to 2E in more depth and took some notes on it. So I do have some comments and questions about that, but I'd like to wait until Christine O'Connor, who may cover these, presents her viewpoints. So I hope you can stay.
Yeah, I can stay until about 7:30. I have an appointment at 8:15, but I can stay until about 7:30.
Yeah, she's the next speaker.
Right?
Hi, Christine. Tim, I think Christine O'Connor is ready, if you are ready for her.
I'm ready.
Okay. Well, I'll start. My name is Christine O'Connor, and I know a couple of you, but some of you may remember me because I worked with Larry Ambrose on the Let Denver Vote campaign to make sure that we don't get stuck bearing the cost of the Olympics unless the voters decide that we should bid on them or do something else. So that's maybe where some of you know me from. But now I'm working on the Vote No on 2E. And I tend to do better when I'm asked questions, but I'll go through the presentation. That's just my nature. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay. There we go. How's that?
That's great. Thank you, Christine.
Okay. So some of this is going to sort of be counterpoint to what Evan said. And the very first title here, no tax hikes for a rodeo arena, sort of is the giveaway here. It is a hike, and it's a hike because of the very language that Christine pointed out. So we'll get to that in a minute. This is a grassroots campaign. We have very little money. We had very little time because this was so condensed. This wasn't even approved by council till August 23rd. And then it didn't even get a ballot number until sometime in September. There hasn't been much time to really get a campaign up and running. But it's comprised of Denver residents. There's a heavy concentration of people who are concerned about this because of its impact on the Globeville, Elyria, Swansea community, which I understand very well because I work on some of the Superfund issues in that community. But more than that, this affects us all because we all are taxpayers who got sold the bill of goods in 2015 that we were going to save the stock show, if you recall, and it wasn't going to cost us a cent because it was going to be from tourism bonds, which are different from these bonds, tourism bonds, tourism revenues that would support a tourism project. So we don't want to get sold again on bailing out what really is sort of a mega project of the mayor's. It was created, as I said, we concerned for our neighbors in Globeville area, Swansea. So it's a bond to pay for the development of the new arena and the 1909 market, as Evan described. The total bond cost after interest is $327 million, and that's right in the blue book. So you've probably all seen that. And so the ballot measure would allow a property tax increase of up to $35 million a year. Now, I would like to direct people, if you are concerned about the discrepancy in what I'm saying and Evan is saying, to actually read after the two bullets in the ballot issue. There's a long, long paragraph. And in the middle of it, as Christine pointed out, and shall the city ad valorem taxes be increased without limitation in amounts sufficient to pay the principal or interest on this obligation. So Evan should know this because I'm sure he saw the same city council discussion that I saw. Brendan Hanlon, when asked, said he couldn't guarantee. He thought this would fall within the existing property mills and the city's being very, very conservative on that. but he couldn't guarantee that our property taxes are not going to be increased. So why should you vote no? There's several reasons. Now is really not the time to vote on a vanity project or some new shiny project when voters have said over and over again, they want to fix infrastructure, they want to get housing, and they want to get people off the streets. But here's our reasons. It's economically unsound. That's not my words. This is what city studies have found. There was a study done in 2014, paid for by the city, a feasibility study that said the market would likely fail because these neighborhoods don't have the population density and purchasing power to support a public market. I think it said you'd have to increase density by 10,000 to make it succeed. And then on the arena, that's on the 1909 public market. On the arena, it said the arena may be viewed as too small for top acts and too big for the majority of smaller acts. I also want to just throw in here that there's a newer market study from 2019 that you can't find online. I got it doing a request from the National Western Center office of the mayor. But that new study, it was done by some big sports consulting firm. And what it found is Denver is below the median comparable market average in these key demographic ratios. Ratios include the assumption of a replacement arena for the Coliseum due to the relatively high inventory of stadiums and arenas in the market. It was a very weak report. It wasn't even finalized. It didn't say that this would succeed. So you need to know that this is a bit of a gamble. So that's number one. Whoops, number two, we've already paid for the National Western Center improvements, okay? You all voted, well, 65% of you voted a 778 million revenue bond in 2015. Remember the mayor saying no new taxes, and then the bull, the Longhorn bull, at that point saying, and that's no bull? Okay, that's what we voted for. We thought that it would save the stock show. We thought it would cover the infrastructure and the development of this. And I hate to be a nitpicker, but since I am a lawyer by training, I kind of can't help it. And I know that if you look back at all the ads for the stock show, they all say, this is what you're doing. You're saving the stock show. The whole kit and caboodle will be 778 million. We're not coming back to you. There will be people who nitpick and say, well, that was only for phase one and phase two. But no voter knew that. No voter. That wasn't public. There was one article by John Murray that if you dig, you can find that. But I just want to just really quickly give you the language that you voted for in 2015. You voted for the constructing, to use these funds for the constructing and improving the approximately 270-acre National Western Center in order to continue it as a home for the Western Stock Show. It doesn't say in order to do phase one and phase two. And as the city attorney said at the city council hearing, ballot language must be clear. This was clear in 2015. Okay, a third reason, probably the most important reason not to vote for this, not to even have this on the ballot, as several city councilmen, including your councilman, Councilman Cashman, said, we have more pressing needs. This shouldn't be on the ballot. It's going to divert funds from other needs and other desires. And when Denver voters were asked, if we do a bond, what would you like to see? They didn't say they wanted a new arena. Overwhelmingly, they wanted to focus on housing and reducing homelessness. They wanted to focus on transportation, mental services. That's what was said in the surveys, and the city disregarded its own input that it gathered. So here is one of the slides from the city's own survey that demonstrates what I just said. When it comes to community support, what matters most? Look at the 40%. Okay, housing, support for people experiencing homelessness. By far and away, the leading desire of people. 4, it has minimal benefits for the local community. I know that it's, I've watched the council meeting a couple of times, and I know that they put out these big numbers about how many dollars we're going to see in wages and economic output. But the jobs, most of the jobs, a ton of the jobs will go for Brad Buchanan's additional studies, his intercept study, his studies about what's going to make the market work, then design, the architect firms who come in and do the design, the big construction firms. And there's no guarantee this is going to affect the population in the area except for the minimum wage jobs. And then on the food access, I think the Globeville-Elyria Swansea Coalition has made this point, or somebody, maybe somebody's made this point from that area. We don't need another incubator. We don't need another cool place where entrepreneurs can go and set up a little butcher shop that's really cool for all of us who have the income to go visit and buy, some great foods. That's not what that neighborhood needs. They really don't need that. They need an old-fashioned grocery store. So the local community opposes the plan, and I'm sure you all saw the editorial written by Alfonso Espino in the Post. If you didn't, I think it was around August 18th. So you should go look at that. This is really important. You need to know City Council had major concerns. First, that it was rushed. Second, and Councilman Cashman did a wonderful job of asking about the last bond that we just approved in 2017, which was for $900 million. It was called Elevate Denver. Do you even remember voting for it? Okay, in 2017, that was only 4 years ago. Only 31% of that bond has been expended, and only 108 of the 434 projects have been completed. We're way behind. We have a lot of funds to work on all those projects. This is a question, is it even the time to be doing any bonding? I'm not, no on 2E people are not saying this. I'm just throwing that out. And that was one of the questions that Councilman Cashman spent a lot of time asking the Department of Finance. It's pretty important. And then Robin Kanish, she also voted not to put this on the ballot at all. And she said, you haven't done your homework. You promised you'd raise funds some other way, and I don't think that you've done your homework. She also said, I think you're taking advantage of voters. The voters in Denver are so generous. They support tax increases. They want to help. They want to improve infrastructure. They want to decrease homelessness. So you're taking advantage of the generosity of Denver voters by just throwing this in as the fifth one of a so-called recovery bond. And she voted against putting it on the ballot for that reason. So a couple of other concerns, pushing this bond this year when the National Western actually has until 2027 to develop some new funding mechanisms. There was no need to put it on. I think I know why, but they didn't do their job at the National Western Center office and the authority, and they didn't get things done. You can try to blame it on COVID, but that's not the only thing that's going on. The reliance on property taxes as opposed to other funding, that's what I just covered, that Councilwoman Kanish was concerned with, and a few others. The exclusion of the local community and development plans. Now, this isn't new. I've been around a long time, as you can tell, and I was around in 2011 when the mayor said he was going to save the stock show, and I was involved to some extent in the 3 plans in 2014 and 15, the Elyria Swansea plan, the Globeville plan, and the National Western. And they were never included in a meaningful way in that planning. It was always, what crumbs can we give them that will also coincide with what we need for the National Western Center? Okay, so I guess that's it. Let me just think. And I apologize for my voice. I think it's just age. So I would like to go back to this, not increasing the tax rates. We will stay within existing capacity. And then Evan said, well, it's upsetting because our lawyers make us take the conservative approach and put that language in. Well, yes, because that is what can happen and certainly may happen with this bond 2E, because as you all know, tourism revenues are way down. We're having trouble in that area. We can't generate enough, and yet we're investing more in a tourism project, sort of, a wing and a prayer that we're going to get an arena that will meet the needs despite not having a sufficient parking. I've heard Paul Andrews say we're woefully underparked at the National Western. So I'd love to get questions because I don't do as well when I'm, just reciting. So.
And Christine, I think that Adam Meltzer, one of our board members, has put at least 2 questions or comments in the chat box. So
Okay.
Adam, perhaps you want to start with those?
Yeah, sure. I could do that. Well, I thought it was funny that you were saying that there's high-end food at the National Western Center. I've been in the National Western Center. I have not seen any evidence of high-end food there, nor do I think there will be. But that's just a comment, not a question.
Well, hold on. Not at the National Western, not at the rodeo. Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
No, that's 2 weeks a year. I'm talking about the public market, which is being featured as a food center, a market where people can come and, develop.
Oh, I got you. Okay. It's like, and the other thing is, I'm just concerned. Without fact checking you, I'm just going to believe what you're saying. It sounds like you've done your homework, but we have a half-built site there. It's fully designed. What's going to happen with all these projects that are not finished? They're just going to sit there. How is that going to serve the community? I don't understand that.
Well, thank you for that question. It's an excellent question, and I do have some more information on that. So first of all, CSU and its agricultural water focus is well on its way on the westernmost side. And the stock show, most of it's, the Stockyard Arena is, Stockyard Event Center is complete. The yards are complete. A lot of what they need for the stock show is complete on the western side. However, there are no designs for the arena. There is nothing chosen.
There are designs for the arena. I've seen them.
Well, I haven't seen them, but they haven't chosen. The Expo Center has been left out. There were 4 elements in the framework agreement, and they were: the 1909 building had to be done, the arena had to be done, the Expo Center had to be done, and the parking structure had to be done. And the last 2 are not even covered in this bond, so they'll be back. And the demolition or renovation of the Coliseum, if that happens, there's no study saying it's faulty. That hasn't been covered in this bond either. So you're giving money through 2E to the city to give to the authority to use however they want to complete some infrastructure, some remediation, to start hiring people on design and construction. But I do want to come back to your question of, are we popping the bubble? Are we bringing devastation to a site that's been planned? And I will point out that the framework agreement leaves till 2027 to work that out. And the framework agreement can be changed. If this is no longer an appropriate plan, given politics, given decline in tourism, given sentiment of voters, it can be revisited and the National Western Center plan can be reopened and redesigned. Does that satisfy does that answer your question?
Somewhat, yeah, thanks.
Okay.
Christine, I have a question that I don't know whether you can address this or whether it's even
Yeah.
a concern really, but are you aware of any way that or how any potential conflict of interest with Brad Buchanan, who's now a private person within this effort? And I admire a lot, I think it's great that he's doing his ranching and stuff. And I don't have any kind of beef with him, but it concerns me a little bit. That was not an intended pun. It concerns me a little bit that someone who was in such a position with the city as the head of our planning, and has all of these existing relationships, is now engaged in something that's very much built on those relationships, and which he develops personal gain from. And I just wondered, is there a mechanism, and I'm a little hesitant to get Evan involved yet, because I think we want to make sure if there are any questions, but Evan, you may know of whether there's any kind of conflict of interest policy in place or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, there is definitely conflict of interest rules. I appreciate your question, but I don't see the conflict between Brad, who runs the entity that's going to be programming this, and what Brad and his family do on the side.
So I'm going to jump in here. I'm going to take off my no on 2E hat, because I really don't, I'm speaking with what I have dug up, and it's a lot. I mean, I've read all the minutes of the authority. I've done a ton of work on this. It's not conflict so much as the revolving door policy that you see. For example, on the board that is under Brad Buchanan, and they're not paid, he is paid. On the board, you have, for example, what's his name? Steve McCarthy, who served on the Olympics Exploratory Committee and is a big Olympics fan. And he's been picked by the mayor to be on it. The mayor basically, I don't want to get in trouble here, chose Brad. Joe Garcia was appointed as an interim to sort of help pull the thing together. And then they put out an RFP, and Joe Garcia chatted with the mayor. And the next thing you know, Brad Buchanan is the soloist, the only one applying for the position, and got the position. And there's no question that he does benefit. You can look on the National Western website, and they have a list of all the cattle people that you can buy cattle from, and he's on that. His ranch is on that. But I'm not as concerned about that as I am about this network that is really an investor network on the board that has been involved in a level of politics I don't play in. It's the big money level. So you're right, there is the potential for real conflict, but I don't see it, to answer your direct question about Brad.
Yeah, and I think that we're lucky to have somebody of Brad's caliber leading the organization. And I mean, Christine is kind of painting this picture of some sinister organization leading the National Western, and it's got high caliber people trying to keep the National Western Center in Denver and alive for another 100 years. There's not some sinister smoke and mirror happening here.
No, but I think times have changed. And, just to give you a heads up, I mean, people aren't eating as much beef. Andrews is already, that's the head of the National Western, already changing his tune on what he's featuring at the National Western. Two of the national cattle breed associations are not coming this year. They had their own, they went to Oklahoma last year and they're not even coming to Denver this year. We're, things are changing and we have to recognize that. And we have to recognize, and I see a question here about the public-private partnership that did fall apart. And it didn't officially fall apart till December. And then right after it fell apart, what happened? The authority and the mayor's office, Evan is the deputy director of staff for the mayor, got together and said, let's do a bond. And they ran back to the voters. And I think that's one of Councilwoman Kanish's main concern, is they didn't do any other work after the P3 fell apart. And so I'm getting off into PMI, I know. So how about another tax question?
I think for our listeners and our association members, if you have a question, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question, or put it in the chat box if you'd like, and I can ask it for you. And while you're thinking about that, just to clarify, I admire Brad Buchanan a lot, and Evan, I agree with you. I think that Brad is a very talented individual. And I guess my question maybe was less about conflict of interest and maybe more about sort of fresh voices or ideas for looking at the National Western Center and where we are now. And I do worry always when I see people sort of, on the one hand, it's good that people have existing relationships that they can draw upon, but sometimes I think it can be also limiting in the way we might approach a problem with fresh eyes. So just want to clarify that.
I appreciate that. I think that having a presence like CSU on the campus brings a fresh approach, and the work that they're going to be doing when it comes to natural resources is something that's new and different to the National Western Stock Show. So I think.
Yeah, and I think that's great too. I'm very supportive of that.
Could I ask Evan a question? The mayor keeps saying this development is going to bring $230 million of revenue a year. Can you cite the sources for that number?
You say the site, you talking about the entire National Western Center campus? I'm absolutely happy to go back and find the site for that and get it to you and to this group as well.
How about current revenues? What are the current revenues that Brad Buchanan and the authority are generating with what's been done in the last 5 years?
Yeah, same. I can go back and get you the statistics.
Can I ask a quick question? The way that I feel this is being positioned for the funding for the National Western is that if we don't do this, stock show ends, all of this other stuff ends. And from my understanding, it is not ending, but it's not going to be a fancy dancy place, which clearly the neighbors don't want. So why are we pushing that?
Well, I do think that we are trying to preserve the stock show tradition. If this measure does not pass, does it mean that the fate of the stock show is sealed? No. I think that what it means is that everything would slow down, to Adam's point about leaving a campus half built. Things would slow down. We would have to go back to the drawing board and come up with another funding scheme, another funding plan to complete these projects, which are part of the master plan. Somebody had asked in the chat, wasn't there supposed to be a public-private partnership for P3? Yeah, there was. That was also part of the funding plan. And then the pandemic hit, and then revenues dropped off, and we had to look for a different option. And that is why we are here, proposing a new funding mechanism via the
Okay,
bond.
on that same line, because our funding dropped off, because all of these things have happened, you then also say this will not increase our taxes. But
Correct.
clearly you've taken a road that you couldn't cover, and now you're saying it's not going to affect our taxes. And
Mhm.
honestly, if you've just ridden a road that you couldn't raise the money, how does it not affect our taxes? It will affect our taxes if you can't find a different road for this.
The revenues for the P3 would have been the tourism revenues. That's what dropped off. The revenues that will be used to pay back these bonds are property taxes. So they're different revenue streams.
What about the
That's my point. It's property taxes. And so when you look at interest rising and you don't have the revenue sources, because let's say that we do have another, another horrible year like we did last year, then the only way that you're going to be able to cover this is through our property taxes.
And the property tax revenue that the city collects right now is sufficient to pay back these bonds.
And what about our schools? What, does that money come out of our schools then?
The same ratio, and there's no change to that. Doesn't come out of the schools, no.
Okay, then I beg to ask the question, what section of our property taxes will then pay for it? Because our property taxes are pretty much set in the budgets. It's not like anybody's saying, hey, we have a lot of extra money, so we're going to give it back to you. But now you're saying it's very confusing to me, because even the way the bill is written, it's very confusing to me. And it's actually, I don't understand how it doesn't increase our taxes.
The tax revenue that we collect right now is sufficient to borrow against without having to increase tax rates to generate additional revenue. Like I said before, we wouldn't be doing this if we had to increase the rates in order to generate any increased revenue.
So Evan, in April of this year, the city just issued its last revenue bonds under 2C. April, that's what, 6 months ago. What's that money being used for? It's revenue bonds that are going to the authority.
Yeah. Again, I can go back and ask that question specifically on that bond for which project on the campus. It's probably some of the horizontal work.
Yeah, it's distressing, and voters really should have an annual report on 2C so they know where the money, how much has been spent, just like we know that only 31% of the last Elevate Denver general obligation bonds have been spent. We should know where the 2C money is at and how much is left. We have no clue, yet we're being asked to vote again. So anyway, I really appreciate the time here. I don't think now is the time to do this. Let them work with this, with GES, let them work with the community, reframe that portion of the work, and come back in another year before 2027 if necessary. That would have been my approach. So.
All right. Tim, I think you had one more question maybe about exploring a new public-private partnership. And for everyone on the call, Adam Meltzer has placed a number of links related to the National Western Center in the chat box. So I would encourage you to, through your own screen, kind of scroll up and down and look at any of that information that you'd like to look at. And so, Mr. President, you're on.
I was just listening to Evan, and he said that the private-public partnership fell through because of the pandemic. Well, now, hopefully, this is slowing down or getting under control. Why doesn't the city explore look into another public-private partnership?
Well, I suppose if we are not successful in getting 2E passed, if we are forced to go back to the drawing board, all options would be on the table, and I suppose we could take another look at that. But this is the option we have before us now, and we're asking voters to consider the package A through E together. And that's where we'll be for the next 3 weeks, asking everyone to look at these together.
And I'm really thankful to City Council that they separated it. I mean, there was a lot of discussion. That's huge because the city attorney was saying, well, we want to keep them all in one package. And because we don't want to confuse voters, but frankly, it's very hard to see how an arena is related to recovery, the way, some of the other projects might be. So.
And Christine, if I can just echo that, and Evan, just some feedback for the mayor and Councilman Cashman for City Council as well. I am extremely reluctant to vote on yes on any kind of large omnibus bills. I've been extremely disappointed to see what Denver Parks and Recs is doing to the area near our boathouse in Wash Park, as well as I don't even understand how it's possible to destroy a National Civic Landmark like Civic Center by putting a giant tarp over top of the Greek Theater. These kinds of things make me the results of voting to give money to the city to do projects that then kind of morph into much different things than it seems like they were going to be. I think it's much better to separate out within what is a reasonable size bond offer, to separate out different initiatives so that we can really pick and choose the things that matter to us. Like, I'm going to be voting for the city to help with the homeless issue and that particular issue. But other issues I don't plan to vote yes on because I don't think we need to be spending money on those things right now. So it does, to me, really help enable me to vote for one thing if I can also not vote for other things. So the separation is good.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Evan and Christine, for spending all this time with us and informing us of this. If there are no other questions or comments, we'll move on to the next speaker. That's okay. Thank you very much again for being here, and thank you, Evan, for staying.
You bet. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate your time and your attention.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Woody Garnsey. He'll be discussing ballot issue 301 and 302, but listening to him at the INC meeting, I know he's supporting 301 and not supporting 302. We don't have a speaker supporting 302. I, however, did take the time to listen to the speaker developer who supports 302 named Norman Harris. He's with the Harland Group. And I took some notes on what he said, and I'll be anxious to maybe present a few thoughts and see what Mr. Garnsey thinks about those. So I'm ready. Woody, you ready?
Sure. My name is Woody Garnsey, and I'm a member of the grassroots citizens group, Yes for Parks and Open Space. And we're supporting ballot measure 301 and opposing ballot measure 302. And we basically call our effort green versus concrete. What is 301? Well, 301 would require a citywide vote before there could be any residential or commercial construction on designated parkland or land protected by a city-owned conservation easement. So what's a conservation easement? A lot of people don't really know what that is. And very briefly, the conservation easement is governed by state law, and it creates a real property interest that's owned by the holder of the easement. And in exchange for money or tax credits provided to that private landowner, the landowner agrees to limits on the use of the land so that the land will be maintained for identified conservation purposes. That's basically what a conservation easement is. The major focus of our 301 effort is to protect the Park Hill Golf Course land, conservation easement, and open space. Well, what is that? In 1997, Denver taxpayers paid $2 million to the Clayton Foundation to purchase 155 acre, the conservation easement for this 155 acre parcel of land. And by that, Clayton gave up forever its development rights on the land. And the conservation purposes of the easement are open space and recreation. In 2019, Clayton sold the land to the real estate developer Westside Investment Properties, subject to the conservation easement that protects the land from development. And the current existential threat to this conservation easement in the open space is that Westside wants to break the easement with the support of the mayor and the city and open the land for a mixed-use residential commercial development. So what's 302? This is a dueling measure that the developer came up with. It's misleading and confusing. It's initiated, supported, and totally financed by the real estate developer that owns the Park Hill Golf Course land. On the surface, it appears to be a protect parks and open space measure, but it actually copies verbatim, word for word, 301, which is our measure. It contains a poison pill that under city law changes the definition of the words conservation easement in a way that would exclude voter protections for a city-owned conservation easement like the Park Hill Golf Course land easement, which was purchased with taxpayer money. So what's at stake here? I ask you to imagine that 155 acres and think about what's happened at 9th and Colorado Boulevard in the former UC Medical Center project. And imagine 155 acres with about 100 acres of intense, dense residential and commercial buildings, and a 25-acre stormwater detention project that's already constructed in the northeast corner, and a smattering of pocket parks. Breaking the easement and allowing the development would be a multi-million-dollar gift from Denver taxpayers to this real estate developer. So real quickly, I'd like to highlight 7 critical facts about the importance of preserving and enhancing Denver's green open space. First, Denver's population has increased by about 50% since 1968, from 500,000 to 750,000. Second, only 5% of Denver's land is used for parks and recreation, compared to the current 15% average for America's 100 largest cities. Third, excluding DIA, nearly 50% of Denver is now paved over or built up, compared to about 19% in the mid-1970s. Fourth, Denver is now the 8th worst out of large US cities for ground level ozone pollution. Fifth, in 2019, the EPA downgraded Denver's ozone rating from moderate to serious. And as we all know, climate change is real, and commercial and residential development, along with increasing air temperatures associated with climate change, result in heat islands, which are a threat to people's health and well-being. Now, I want to address for a few minutes some of the arguments that Tim maybe will be bringing up that were related to things that Westside has said and is saying about this. First, Westside says that a citywide vote is inappropriate because people living near the land should determine the future of the land. They basically have a mantra that is local voices, local choices. Frankly, what they're doing is saying Westside voices, Westside choices. What's wrong with their argument? First of all, it ignores the fact that the Park Hill Golf Course land is protected uniquely by a city-owned open space and recreation conservation easement. This isn't just another piece of private unencumbered land. The easement was purchased by the city, and it's a real estate asset that we, all taxpayers, own. The voters citywide should decide about the future of the land and the conservation easement as in the same way as required now under the charter regarding possible sale or lease of designated park land. This is a really important point I want to make. Where neighbors closest to land that is being rezoned typically are given special consideration regarding the rezoning, all Denver voters have a vital, legitimate interest in what happens to a city-owned land conservation easement real estate asset, just as they do with what happens to our designated parks. Westside argues that it's ideal to build residential and commercial hardscape on this protected land, not around on it and not on the outside. What's wrong with this policy? Well, building hardscape on this open space land is just crazy. There is development on the outside already that's going on. The Urban Land Conservancy has a project called Artway North that will include 42 for sale townhouses, of which 23 they consider to be affordable. And it'll have 225 affordable rentals. That's just north of the Park Hill Golf Course land. Second, the Del West Development Group announced in the last couple of months that just east of the Park Hill Golf Course at 38th and Holly, they're going to build a project with 253 affordable units. And really importantly, I want you to think about, if you know that area well, the 40th and Colorado A-Line Station area. There is going to be massive, dense development in that area, not in my lifetime, but over the next, probably starting 5 to 10 years. And that massive development is going to include housing. It's going to include commercial development and many, many things, and many workers and many residents. And it's going to be all the more important to maintain this open space so that they'll have open space and health benefits for all the new people who will be living there. And we've just touched the tip of the iceberg because we've identified 2 development groups that have assembled already 35 acres in that area right around the park, the 40th and Colorado Station, which is destined for massive, dense development. Another thing Westside says is it's a food desert. Well, that's just plain wrong, because 2 blocks away is a very fine market that's called the Park Hill Supermarket that has fabulous fresh produce, fish, and meat. And finally, they'll be arguing that a city survey that the Community Planning and Development Department did as part of what we consider to be a sham development process that's going on now for land that can't be legally developed. That current plan, that survey, first of all, they did a survey in connection with that. And the survey was definitely a push survey, which was aimed toward development. And professionals have looked at it and said that is exactly what it was. The survey also was contracted by the Community Planning and Development Department. And we have documentation to show that that department considers the developer Westside to be the city's client, not citizens of Denver, but the city's client. So the whole process has been tainted with that. The survey contradicts a very important 2019 professional valid survey of all Park Hill that was commissioned by the Greater Park Hill Community RNO. And that survey concluded that 77% of the people supported maintaining 100% open space. So what's the ultimate goal of our group for that land? Our ultimate goal is to preserve the conservation easement and eventually to have the city do what the PRAB voted for last year unanimously, was to have the city purchase it using Measure 2A funds, which is what they're targeted for. The purchase price shouldn't be more than the fair market value of the encumbered land, which would be $5 to $6 million for 155 acres. And when you think about that, you need to know that in 2019, you may know that we paid $5 million for about 2 acres of land in southeast Denver for a park. I want to close, first of all, with an important quote that I think is powerful from the Denver Parks and Recreation Game Plan for a Healthy City. What they say is parks, recreation, and urban forests are vital infrastructure to our city's health. Trees and vegetation in our parks help clean the air we breathe, provide shade that decreases the cooling load on our energy infrastructure during our hot months. And finally, I need to address one very recent and critical issue that's come up since the Blue Book was published. The Blue Book contains false information about the fiscal impact of 301 and 302. And the way it's been presented, although these are identical, there's identical language in the two provisions. What you'll see if you look at the blue book is that they're suggesting that there's a huge fiscal impact of a possible election that would apply to 301. And they say that there's no impact of the identical language in 302. And I just call your attention to that. We've been trying to get the Clerk and Recorder and the Department of Finance to address this issue and to correct the information with direct communications to the voters, because it's false, it's misleading, and it never should have been printed that way. And that's just critical. There is support of the city administration for this West Side developer who, very honestly, and I think everyone probably knows, made significant financial contributions to the mayor, and the city planning department has admitted in this document we got in connection with the Cora request that they consider West Side to be the city's client. So I'll be happy to take questions. We ask you to vote for 301 and to vote no on 302.
Woody, I have a quick question for you. If the city enforces the conservation easement, which it should, why then do they need to buy the park?
Well, if the land is owned by the real estate developer, subject to the conservation easement.
We own the development, right?
And so
We own the land.
the development rights belong to all the citizens of Denver. But the short answer is that if the real estate developer can't put in the big project that it wants to do and make the millions of dollars that it would make, very frankly, they don't have another use. They don't want to turn it back to a golf course. And we think that it will give a prime opportunity for the city to own the fee interest in the land, which was actually what was planned in 1989 when we all voted for the bond issue that created the $2 million fund that was later used in 1997 to purchase the conservation easement. I don't know if that answers the question.
Well, actually, it really doesn't, because I think the city actually is in the position right now, because if there is a conservation easement, there is a contract with the city and county of Denver stating this is how this land will be. It was a gamble for the developer to buy it to see if they could then usurp the conservation easement. So I kind of think we should enforce the conservation easement, and if they want to donate the land back, then that's lovely.
Well, effectively, I guess my response to that is that there is value to the land as encumbered, and it was appraised 3 or 4 years ago as encumbered at around $3.5 million, and I'm assuming today that value is probably $5 to $6 million, and some people have supported that who know what they're talking about. And so they have an asset that has some value. And what I'm saying, yes, there was a meeting early on after the West Side bought the land with some community members, and somebody asked, why did you buy this? Why did you pay this big amount of money, which is $24 million for land you can't develop? And Andy Klein, who's the primary owner of the company, literally reached into his pocket as if he was pulling out dice, threw them pretended to be throwing them on the table and said, we're gamblers. And that's what's going on. So what I'm saying, when we suggest that the city should acquire the fee interest in the land for $5 to $6 million, that's basically what its fair market value is. And yes, that would cause the developer to have to take a financial haircut, but they took the gamble.
Tim, you had some questions, I think, based on having listened to someone who supports 302, and I've been following this issue fairly closely myself, so I have some questions and thoughts as well. But Tim, I know you had some specific questions, maybe?
Well, I certainly am not an apologist for 302. My knee-jerk and initial reaction was, yeah, keep the green space for all the reasons that Woody just mentioned. Because I had to leave the INC meeting, I was able to go to the video of the meeting and spend some time listening to the person who presented in support of 302 named Norman Harris, who's the managing partner of the Harlan Group, which is an African-American owned development firm based in Denver, whose mission is to bring forward a new model of development. These are his words, I wrote them down, which is asset-based, inclusive, and intentional in driving benefits to communities of color. So, well, it sounded real good. And then he goes on to talk about the Northeast Denver Empowerment Group and an action called Empower Northeast Denver, and talked about the golf course and the amount of money that's needed to water it and fertilize it and pesticide it, and talked about the fact that 60 acres of that park is designed to remain a park, which is about the size of Cheeseman Park, and that the other development would be I know he's the developer, so he wants this to benefit him. But it sounded like it could benefit the community. It also talked about Northeast Park Hill being different than Southeast Park Hill as far as their makeup of ethnic peoples, and mentioned that Park Hill is one of the most diverse communities in the city, with the highest percentage of African-American ownership, but it hasn't prospered as well as other parts of the city. He talked about the problems with the Park Hill Golf Course. And it just opened my eyes a little bit to look at another point of view, because everybody wants open space. Everybody wants to have land that you can go and enjoy. But possibly there are some people who could benefit from some development in that area. If anybody's interested, you can go to denverinc.org. That's their front page. And in the far left column, there's a thing that says videos, and it's YouTube video. And it's a YouTube video of that INC meeting from Saturday. And you don't have to listen to the whole meeting. That's one advantage of Zoom and these videos. You can fast forward to listen to the parts you want to listen to. And it just opened my eyes to think about the possibility that maybe there's some benefit to having some development in that area. That has nothing to do with what's legally allowed or correct, but just opened my eyes a little bit to ask some questions. So these are some thoughts that I had.
Sure, Tim, those are all good observations to put before the group, because that is what the developer is putting out there. First of all, everybody needs to understand that if the easement is ever broken, it literally is a gift from Denver taxpayers to this developer of a minimum of $50 to $60 million, which is the difference between the value of the land now as encumbered by the easement and the value of 155 acres in that location without an easement. So keep that in mind. This group that they hold out is as sort of a citizen group called Empower Northeast Denver. In fact, it's Empower Northeast Denver is a wholly owned subsidiary of the developer Westside that was created in June of this year for the sole purpose of defeating 301. If you look at the Secretary of State's records, the office for that Empower Northeast Denver group is in fact the developer's office, and the registered agent is an employee of the developer. It's not a citizen group. Our position on what Norm Harris talks about as far as some development opportunities, yes, there are needs in every community, including that community. But you don't sacrifice a conservation easement protecting 155 acres of open space, which is the last acreage anywhere near that size in the city of Denver that could become another fabulous regional park. You don't sacrifice that and put hardscape on it when hardscape should be built around the land, not on the land. And that's why I gave you the examples of the Urban Land Conservancy project just north of the golf course, the Del West project just east of the golf course, and the massive development. I urge everybody to take an opportunity to go to the 40th and Colorado light rail station and drive around that area and look at all that property. And as I said, we've identified at least 35 acres of that land that have been recently assembled by these two real estate groups. And that is truly the tip of the iceberg about what's going to happen there. And that development eventually, again, not in my lifetime, but maybe my children's lifetime and my grandchildren, will be developed all the way over to Rhino. From there, another point, is that, yes, this is a diverse community. It's a community that is now suffering from some of the worst pollution. They say the Globeville Elyria zip code is maybe the most polluted zip code in the whole country. And that whole area from the Platte River over by Globeville all the way east to Quebec is seriously impacted by pollution. And it's being compounded now by the fact that we're expanding I-70 in a way that will add more traffic and more pollution. And it's all the more reason that we need to preserve open space that will help with the heat island effect that is being built up, and that will hopefully absorb pollution and give people recreational opportunities. This is when I started talking about this whole issue, I sort of talked about it as a vision thing. And we've had vision in the past with great city leadership. That it's resulted in a lot of the parks that came up in Mayor Spears' regime. Before that, in 1882, a lot of people don't know the history of the city parkland, but when there were about 25,000 people living in Denver in 1882, those citizens put together what's today about $1,500,000 to purchase those acres that were out in the middle of nowhere, with just rattlesnakes and prairie grass between there and where the people were living down by the Platte. That was vision. And Mayor Spear had vision, and Mayor Webb had vision when he supported the acquisition of the conservation easement. And if you talk to people in the conservation easement community around the state, they will argue that this would be a tragedy for the conservation easement movement to sacrifice this urban conservation easement and have it developed. This is a unique opportunity to preserve it. Once it's gone, once you put concrete on 1 square foot of that land, it will never see the light of day again.
Woody, I support what you're doing, and I just I cannot believe I can believe that a developer gambled on the land, but I think it is really important that people understand that all the argument about do we need to densify development, do we need to have more affordable housing, do we need to have more open space, all of these things really don't matter much in the face of a very simple issue, which is that there is a legal conservation easement on that land owned by the citizens of Denver that prevents development of that land. And if we vote to change that, we are opening, I think, a very dangerous door to easily allow our city or private interests to change laws to suit their particular interests at any particular time. It's difficult enough, I think, for citizens to have a clear idea of what to expect without something as permanent as a conservation easement being put in place and then being disregarded because of excuses about wanting to develop the land. There is plenty of land in this city to develop. It doesn't have to be right there.
And Christine, that's a really good point. One thing, Mayor Wellington Webb is one of our big supporters and one of the primary movers and shakers in this effort. And when he talks about this, he says, yes, keep in mind, Denver is 155 square miles. That doesn't mean, why would you take and put hardscape on 155 acres of open space when there are plenty of space for other, for that kind of development off this land. But really, really importantly, one thing that I've worked a lot in the last 4 years with the statewide group, which is now called Keep It Colorado, which has all of the, basically all of the conservation easement communities involved with that. And there's an interesting thing that's happened here is that most conservation easements in Colorado and around the country are actually held by what are called land trusts. The sole purposes of a land trust is to preserve the conservation easement. But under Colorado law and elsewhere, conservation easements can be owned by governmental entities, just like Denver owns this conservation easement. And think about this, that puts those conservation easements owned by governmental entities in a very different category, with a conflict of interest between the purpose of preserving the easement and development. And you have a situation just like what we have right now with this easement, where we have a city administration that is all for development and is supporting this developer's plans to develop the land for whatever reason, whether it's to increase the tax base or for other reasons. But that creates a tension that is pretty unique, and it has to be resisted, because if we allow this easement to go away, like Christine said, other easements are in jeopardy, not only here, but around the state. And we need to stand our line. We got to draw a line somewhere. And the line was drawn in 1997 when the Mayor Webb administration decided to buy the conservation easement. And if every time there's a development push on a conservation easement, people find a way to break it, pretty soon we're going to have nothing but concrete.
Are there any other questions or comments for Mr. Garnsey?
Okay, well, thank you so much, Woody. I appreciate your addressing the questions that I had and the issues that were brought up by this Norman Harris. Thanks again for being here and taking the time to do that.
And let me just close by thanking you all too, and saying that this truly is important. And one of the most important players in our effort for the last 4.5 years has been Cindy Johnstone, who we all know well, and is working really hard with us on this effort. So thanks from all of us for your time.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody, for sticking with us. I think we have some other guest speakers if they want to go ahead. Realizing that this won't leave much time for the board meeting, there's nothing on the board agenda that can't be delayed. So I think it's important to get the information out to the residents about the ballot issues and our guest speakers, next one being Scott Balderman, who's a representative from Denver Public Schools.
Except that Scott Balderman is not on the call tonight.
Okay, so Scott isn't here. That's all right. He'll be here next month. I think this is the first meeting he's missed. So then our next speaker is Councilman Paul Kashmann, and I see you're still here, Paul. Thank you for taking the time to remain.
Yeah, well, it's, a whole bunch of fascinating issues. The vote, read your blue books. These issues are important, and a number of them have some real complexity that deserves serious consideration. As far as the Park Hill goes, I'm definitely a no on 302. I'm still considering 301 because we do have an easement in place right now. My preference would have long been for the city to buy that land. Then we could truly come up with a development plan that would serve the city well. I have real concerns about leaving it to West Side to determine what gets built on that site. The private market has given us what we've got right now, which is a city in a major housing crisis. And I have no faith that West Side would act in the city's best interest. And it's not slamming them. It's just, evidence of what I've seen. West Side paid 24 million for that site for 155 acres. Kentro Group paid $19.3 million for 25 acres of the former Colorado Department of Transportation site. The 13-acre site on Arkansas and Birch is zoned for up to 980 housing units, along with a grocery store, some restaurants, some retail shops. That's on 13 acres or close to 14 acres. West Side, from all reports, wants to develop about 90 acres. The only thing I've ever heard over the years as a real consistent cry from that community is they want a grocery store. Great, fabulous. And there may be some other truly community serving uses. And I've said from the beginning, my preference is to maintain the conservation easement. But if I heard a real true community dialogue, I'd be up for develop 10%. If I heard overwhelming need, you might talk me up to 20%, but 60%, that's just a land grab. And so I'm definitely not in favor of leaving it to the developer to act in the city's best interest. As has been said, I'm working with Councilwoman Black right now to strengthen Denver's tree preservation ordinance. Denver, the numbers I hear is Denver has 8% of our land area dedicated to parks. New York City has 21%, even Los Angeles, the ultimate concrete jungle, has 13%. This is not a case where Denver's overloaded with this lush tree canopy, and who cares if we develop an existing open space. I care a lot. So that's how I feel about 301 and 302. As I say, I'm still considering 301. A couple of things that people really need to pay attention to that I don't think has been mentioned yet tonight. Item 303, which is presented as a measure to help our homeless population, our unhoused residents, does anything but, and puts the city in great legal jeopardy. It tells us we can develop up to 4 safe outdoor spaces, regulated encampments, but it also declares that we need to sweep all unregulated encampments within 72 hours. Meanwhile, we're under a federal court order to post encampments for 7 days. So this would be a nightmare of legal jeopardy from all angles. So I'm 100% against 303. 304 similarly tells us we need to reduce our sales tax from 4.81% to 4.5%, which would lead to tens of millions of dollars of mandatory cuts in areas that our residents have already voted for. I mean, in recent ballots, we've voted for $35 to $40 million a year to come in for our parks, $35 to $40 million per year to come in for services for our homeless residents. We voted in Caring for Denver several years ago, the same amount of money for mental health and drug treatment services. Our current budget is just stretched to the max just to carry on existing services. Cutting our sales tax arbitrarily like that, I can't see where it's a positive for the city. I just can't see it. The other thing I feel very strongly about is I'm supporting a no vote on 2F, which would overturn the group living amendment that council passed a year or so ago, which increases housing options for Denver residents. We went through, even after the recommendations came out of the group living committee, city council took what the group living committee put forward and pared it way down. Right now, you're allowed, or before this amendment passed, you were allowed to have 2 adults in a home unrelated. It has always been, you can have unlimited relatives living together, and this amendment does not change that, and I don't think it should. The allowance for 2 adult relatives and for 2 unrelated adults and all their adult relatives. The proposal was to raise that up to 8 adults unrelated and their adult relatives. We brought that down to 5 unrelated adults. Now, children, we can't legislate, so children come along with every housing option. And so to overturn that and go back to 2 is going back to prehistoric days of housing. If you look around the country, you'll see a couple of things. Most cities are well above 2, most in the 5 or 6 adult range. California is unlimited, unrelated, and no city that I looked at did those types of housing allowances lead to destruction of the neighborhoods. So I'm looking for a no vote on 2F. 2G is something that came out of city council. It strengthens the office of the independent monitor in several ways. And we've worked for years to see that our city has an independent monitor that is a model around the country. And so I'm hoping to support that. Let's see, what else? Well, I'll go quickly through a few things I wanted to mention tonight. Mark your calendars for Tuesday, November 30th. Mayor Hancock will be having his final virtual cabinet in the community devoted to District 6 on Tuesday, November 30th. The link will be coming out in the coming weeks. If you're not on my email newsletter, please sign up so I can keep you posted to that link. As I mentioned, I'll be meeting along with Councilwoman Black with our city forester, Mike Swanson, in the next few weeks to look at options of strengthening our tree preservation ordinance. Right now, Denver has one of the least aggressive preservation ordinances in the country. We do have some requirements that you get a permit if you're doing demolition or construction work on your land, some restrictions in your front and side setbacks. Other cities talk about heritage or champion trees that are of a certain diameter or a certain species. And, I don't think anybody has, or there are very rare restrictions that 100% prevent someone from cutting down a tree, but it does require, in many cases, substantial replacement of so that we maintain our tree canopy. So we'll be looking at a variety of ways to do that. I was able to finally get approval from our Department of Transportation to cut our neighborhood speeds from 25 to 20, and we'll be putting an ordinance through in the next several weeks to make that official. I just met with our police chief today. One of my aides, some of you know Brent Farberger, discovered a new software. It's for those who care, it's called 529 Garage. You can Google that. It's a software program that makes it much easier for people to register their bicycles, makes it much easier for the police to get bicycles back when stolen bikes are recovered. And Chief Payson has agreed today to purchase this new software. We're bringing in a bike cop from Vancouver, BC, where they've cut their bike thefts by 44% in a period of a few years. So he's going to come in and help us get this program rolling. I'm real excited about that. I got a couple of my colleagues have supported 3 amendments to the mayor's budget that I put forward. One is to the Parks Department trying to balance its own budget, cut its contribution to the Denver Municipal Band of $25,000. And I was able to get agreement from my colleagues to restore a $35,000 funding to keep the, in this time of pandemic, I can't think of anything I'd rather fund than free concerts in the park by an organization that's been putting on free concerts in Denver literally since 1861, when it was started as the Denver City Band. Also got an extra $35,000 added to the mayor's budget. They want to hire a consultant to look at ways that they would improve community engagement in the city. And the one that I'm happiest about is we're going to, the mayor in the past few years has put in $500,000 for safe routes to schools. And every year we bump it $1 million or $1.5 million. This year we put forward $1.5 million addition to that. So I got in the 2021 budget, I've talked about it here before. We got a speed limit study done looking at our neighborhood speeds, our arterials and collectors, our school zones, and then slow zones, which are like high pedestrian areas around rec centers, community centers, and the like. In addition to recommending supporting reduction in neighborhood speeds, the study came up with evidence that Denver is behind the national standards in consistency in traffic control around our school campuses. So this money for safe routes to school, I think, is critically important. So I think those are the things I'll end with tonight. I'd be glad to answer any questions if you have any.
Thank you, Councilman. I'll note we still have Woody Garnsey and Christine O'Connor with us. So
A bunch of ne'er-do-wells, those two, Holy crap.
I just wanted, Tim, if it's okay with you, perhaps they may have some questions for the councilman as well. It looks like Adam has maybe something. And Councilman, I just want to, I'm never afraid to tell you what I think.
I wouldn't expect that.
Whether it's about geese or slot houses, either one.
Yeah.
One thing I just want to say, you were saying earlier, and I want to, you said something along the lines related to the City Park golf course and the conservation easement, that if you could kind of support maybe 10% development, or, maybe if someone really explained, you could support 20%. And I just as one of your constituents, I just want to say that for me, it is really important that the city stick to its principles in related to the conservation easement. So it's not a question of, do we need to have more opportunities for development in the city? Yes, I'd be all in favor of cutting our zoning code by a significant margin. That would be a great way to make things easier to develop and less expensive for those of us involved in that industry. But I just, the city has a conservation easement on that land. That conservation easement should stand. And if it doesn't stand, I don't know how we as citizens of Denver have any trust whatsoever in our city government that told us we're going to use your money to buy this conservation easement, which is not something that's subject to the whim of a mayor or a developer. It's a conservation easement. It's there, and it's the principle. None of these other arguments, I think, are really important.
Well, I mean, as I've said from the beginning, my preference is to maintain the easement. You know, I'm not going to lose a moment's sleep if no development happens on that land. Absolutely not. I also recognize one of the reasons I want to maintain the easement is because things do change. While today we're sitting here, a lot of us going, we need to preserve this open space. We've got no idea what the future is going to bring and what our needs as a community might be. And, you know, when you have 155 acres of open space, hang on to it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, as I know, I think it was Adam put it into the chat, which I agree with. There's plenty of other space to develop in that area, you know, that I would see to put a grocery store and whatnot. And you know, and I will stand by what I said. If I felt there was a legitimate community-driven process going on, but my personal feeling is that the developers had too heavy a hand in this. And I told them when I first met them, you know, after they bought the property and they came in to introduce themselves, I told them I thought they made a big mistake, because you can look at the same city council I can, and I don't see them, you know, maybe they count votes better than I do, but I don't see them with 7 votes to overturn that conservation easement. And I mean, again, if you look at, like I said, Kentro paid almost 20 million for just 25 acres. They paid 24 million for 155 acres, basically at the intersection of Colorado Boulevard and I-70.
But that conservation easement should have conveyed with that sale.
Oh, right. Absolutely. But what I'm saying is,
so it's great that they want to spend $24 million to conserve our open space for us.
Well,
that's great.
It would be nice to believe that, but they're gambling, because at that price, if they get their hands on the amount of acreage they want, they stand to make an enormous profit.
Councilman, I'm just, you know, our city should not allow this. And I understand that's what we're looking at with this vote, but frankly, we shouldn't even be having to vote on this. There's a conservation easement on that land.
And that's what I mean I have no argument with Woody, and I met Woody, now, you know, COVID messes with how long ago, but we met at a mountain parks event up at Chief Hosa, and you know, Woody's dedicated to our park preservation of our parkland. And you know, when I say I'm, you know, deciding whether to vote yes on 301, it's which tool is going to be most effective, what Woody's proposing or what we already have. You know, what Woody's proposing, just right now, it's in the hands of city council to overturn that easement. As I understand Woody's proposal, or the 301, it puts another layer of insurance on preserving the easement, in that it requires a vote of the people. So, yeah.
But Christine brought up a good point. How did this even get on the ballot? Like, did they just gather enough signatures and it got on the ballot? I mean, how does something like this get on the ballot?
Yeah, I mean, you know, Denver has a relatively low signature threshold for getting items on the ballot. And, you know, there's a pro and a con there. You know, the pros are that, you know, the people should be able to get initiatives on the ballot. The cons are, and this is not referring to 301, but we have had some other initiatives get on the ballot in recent years that council has had to sit down with the proponents and rewrite so that when they got to the ballot, they were, that they made legal sense, no matter which side of the issue you were on. Yeah,
Councilman, could I just interject? Because I was involved in the whole process. I mean, we,
absolutely. Will.
for 301, we secured 14,900 signatures. We needed 8,600 good signatures, and it was determined that we ended up with about almost 10,000 good signatures. So that's how we got on the ballot. When West Side put its 302, tried to put 302 on the ballot, we pushed back as hard as we could with this clerk and recorder because the language is confusing and never should have been approved by the election division because of the confusion that it created. And we wrote 2 letters immediately pointing out all the issues that we thought there were, the legal issues with approval, and saying that the clerk and recorder should have set it back for redrafting. And unfortunately, on the second out of 3 days that the clerk and recorder's office had to approve it or reject it, they approved it, and Paul Lopez sent me a letter, because I had sent the other letters, saying they hadn't even read our letters. And that was pretty offensive. They said they hadn't read them. And had they read them and read them carefully, or the city attorney, had they read them carefully, there's no question in my mind, but that they would have sent it back for redrafting.
Yeah, well, we're on this one, Woody, we're on the same page. We may be reading a couple of paragraphs differently, but like I say, I still think the developer made a mistake gambling with their money. So we'll see how it comes out. Anything else I can comment on?
I just want to thank you for asking all those tough questions at City Council of Brendan Hanlon and I forget her name.
Stephanie Adams.
Yeah, they were really good questions. I mean, the question whether any bonding should have been done when we have so much left of Elevate is crazy.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think why they did it is, mayor has 2 years left, and you don't know what we may get a next mayor that we love. We may get a next mayor that's a complete nightmare. And I think Mayor Hancock wanted to get these projects in line. And there's a lot, while I, as Christine's pointing out, there's good discussion to be had whether any bonds should have been put out now, whether it was, well, it was certainly rushed compared to what we went through with the Elevate bond. But at the same time, looking at A through E, along the way, there are a bunch of projects that I think deserve to be online to get accomplished. Some of the library work and parks. There's some individual good things, but it is, we've already, as was pointed out, we've got a couple of hundred projects still in line from Elevate to get done. And, you can't get people to do work right now. Nobody's got the employees they need. Materials are expensive. So we'll see where all this goes. It's going to be interesting. My guess is most, if not all, of A through E will pass. I think E is certainly the most controversial. I would be surprised if A, B, C, D didn't pass. But I'm not an economist. I have not done any scientific polling. I'm just one of you guys trying to, prognosticate a little bit on looking into a strange context to see what people are going to vote for.
Any other
Anything
questions?
else?
It doesn't look like there's any other questions
Great. Well,
from my
thank you.
view.
It's always good to see you guys. You're some of the most intelligent questioners that I come up with face to face with at my neighborhood meetings, and I appreciate that. I appreciate all sides of the issues being discussed, and thanks a lot. We'll see you here next month.
Keep
All right, Paul,
beating the
thank you.
borax, Councilman. Speak for the
Adios.
trees.
Pardon me, sir.
Speak for the trees.
I shall do that, Adam. Thanks for your
Oh,
support.
Councilman, I was gonna suggest, I'm working on a couple different projects in Mississippi right now. I'm actually a licensed architect in Mississippi as well as Colorado.
Okay.
Of all things, but Mississippi, especially along the coast, has really strong tree conservation, particularly related to live oaks. And so I know always city council is kind of looking for like model, something to model things on. So I
Sure.
just wanted to throw that out there that some of the coastal areas of Mississippi have really good and strong tree conservation legislation. So
Yeah, we are in the dark ages on that here. We really are. And we should be the strongest. And I'll just take a minute. I grew up in New Jersey, was back visiting some high school friends recently. Come around the corner and there's a bulldozer just mowing down trees. And it's what you have to do in that part of the state because it's solid trees and you get moisture and trees grow. Out here, it just isn't that way. We can't mow things down haphazardly. So, I appreciate the support for our tree canopy. It's going to be necessary because when we really start talking about it, developers are going to flip out, and they don't want any pressure on them when they try to build 6,000 square foot homes. So, again. It's great to see you all.
Thank you very much, Paul. I appreciate you taking the time and spending it with us.
You bet. See you next month.
Thank you to any speakers who are still remaining. Okay, let's call the official board meeting to order. We've actually